There's a 5-step process that most sharp bettors are going to use before ever placing a first 5 total over-under runs scored in any MLB game, meaning that you are going to have a better chance of winning first 5 total runs bets if you follow this exact strategy on Outlier. Because this process is all built off of asking the right questions, not surface level questions like is this a good or bad pitcher versus a good or bad lineup. But instead, let's add a little bit more context by asking who is more likely to get to the plate more often in these matchups, as well as looking at the pitcher versus the opposing team, and seeing if there's any weather that could impact this game by any means. So in this video, I'm going to be walking you through all 5 steps that myself and other sharp bettors use, which include both of the starters' form, the top of each of the orders against the pitcher that they're facing, the early scoring trend, park and weather data, and as well as the market. So it's a lot of information, but thankfully it can be made simple here on Outlier's mobile app. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So now that we are over here, what I always recommend users doing is start by selecting the books that you are able to bet on. So let's just say that I wanted to look at FanDuel, DraftKings, and we'll leave ProfitX and Kalshi. So now that we are here, we will see all of these different lines listed. However, what you're not seeing on this screen is actually the first 5 total over under. And instead, what you need to do is just click into one of these games. So let's just click into this Diamondbacks versus Pirates game. And once you see that, now we will be given the full market for this matchup. But instead, again, what we are looking at is the first 5 innings. So as you can see here, there's a first 5 innings button, and we are looking at the total over under. Now you will see alt lines as well as the original lines. So we'll find something as close as we can to what the original line would be. And let's just look at this 4.5 here, right? So we have the minus 152 to go over 4.5, but we also have plus 134 at the under 4.5. So let's just click on the over 4.5, and now we will see all of this information here. Now, immediately off of the bat, you can see that the Diamondbacks over their last 10 have hit the over in 70% of the games. However, the Pirates on the other hand have only hit the over 30% of the time. So it's almost flip-flopped in terms of their hitting percentages. And if you wanted to look at other hit rates by looking at their last 20, the 2026 season, or even head-to-head matchups, you could go ahead and filter that by just clicking on these buttons here. Now, while it is important to see how these teams have performed really over their last 10 or even last 20, that doesn't tell us everything that we need to know. So if you really want to win more first 5 total bets, then you need to pay attention here, because Outlier allows us to set filters and manipulate data so that way we can really see how this game could actually play out. So let's go ahead and jump back over here to Outlier. And what I mean by manipulating some of this data is if we go back to the last 10 games for these two teams, you can see here again hitting 30% of the time and even 70% of the time on the under. However, what you actually see here is if we can hit that drop down arrow, you can look at the projected starting pitcher for this game, which is Mitch Keller. So again, we are looking at 30% hit rate for the over, but if we select that on, we can actually see those two numbers flip. And we can go look at the 2026 season. It's still 70% of the time that we are seeing whenever he is the starting pitcher, the over is hitting 70% of the time. Now, if you wanted to do the exact same thing for the Diamondbacks, now the projected pitcher for this team is Kelly, and we can see here that again, yes, it was 58% of the time for the full 2026 season. It was 70% over their last 10, but for the 2026 season, when Merrill Kelly is in, it goes up from 58% to 67%. So between the two starting pitchers for this team, whenever they are in, there are a ton of runs scored. Now, it's also important to understand which of these teams are scoring. Well, you can see on Outlier, there are 2 different colors numbers. You can see a gray number and a black number. The black number is the actual team that this pitcher is for, which is the Diamondbacks. So you can see that they scored 9 runs in this game, 2 runs in this game, 2 runs in this game, 3 runs in this game. Me personally, I don't think that there is necessarily a conversation to say, hey, this Diamondbacks team plays better when they have this starting pitcher. I don't necessarily think there's any conversation to be had there. So what I actually care about are these light gray numbers. You can see in this start, he allowed 2 runs, 3 runs, 1 run, 2 run, 4 runs. Well, what we actually need is for 4.5, so 5 runs to be scored in this game. So if he's allowing over half of that, that's a pretty good sign. So let's actually go back to this Pirates and look at Mitch Keller and what's happening here. So you can see in this game, it's 0, 6, 5, 4, 1, 4, 5, 6, 7. Meaning that these two pitchers are allowing a ton of runs every single time they come to the bump, which is obviously a good sign for me if I am looking looking at the over, but there's more research that we actually need to do. And where I want to go from here is actually the batting profile for each of these teams. So if you go to this matchup tab, you can click that, and then let's just click into this pitcher and we'll go to his earned runs. So you'll see here, his earned runs will pop up, and we're on strikeouts right now, but if you click this ER, and from here, we can actually scroll down and look at the batting profile for these teams. So now you can see that versus right-handed pitching, which Merrill Kelly is, this Pittsburgh team is one of the best in the MLB with a 264 average, which again is second. And even over their last 30 games, they are still a top 3 ball club. So obviously this matchup is looking really good to go for the over. And if you want to do the same exact thing for Keller here, you could just click into his, go to the earned runs from there. But again, we've already identified that this could be a really strong play for the over. And the next thing that I would actually check here, you can even check here, like the batter stats versus Mitch Keller. So again, you can see how good they've been hitting. There's been 2 hitters, Corbin Carroll and Perdomo, who have not done necessarily well, especially with a high at-bat count versus this opposing pitcher. But versus right-handed pitching, you can really see how these numbers kind of improve as well. And you can do that again, looking at both pitchers here and both batting lineups. But where I was actually headed next with this is the weather data. And as you can see here, the wind is blowing out at 7 miles an hour. That is not a huge gust of wind, but it is definitely enough that could impact this game. Now, the next thing here is the ballpark factor. As you can see, it ranks 5th, meaning that is a very hitter-friendly ballpark with a ballpark factor of 105. Now, if you wanted to compare this to the other stadiums for the 2026 season, you can see that here. Again, ranks 5th, meaning it is a very hitter-friendly ballpark. And if you look at versus for left-handed batters, still is a top 5. For right-handed batters, takes a little bit of a hit, but it's still a top 8 ballpark, meaning that this is a very favorable option for us if we are targeting the over. Now, from here, there's actually one more thing that I check, and that is always going to be line movement. I want to make sure that the market actually agrees with whatever side I am betting. And for me, on this particular play, I'm leaning a little bit more towards the over 4.5. So if I wanted to see if the market agrees with my play, I would just click this button and looking at line movement. And as you can see, I also want to look at Pinnacle. Pinnacle is one of the sharpest books when it comes to these game line plays. What you can see is this line trending down, and that's exactly what I want to see for the over 4.5, which is what I'm leaning towards. Because if I were to buy this earlier in the day at 5 o'clock this morning, this was priced at minus 125 on Pinnacle, but as the day has gone on, it's sitting at roughly minus 150. That is nearly a 25-cent difference from what they're willing to pay you now as opposed to what the market was sitting at, meaning they want to pay you less because they are feeling more confident that this play is actually going to happen. So from here, all I would have to do is pick out what is the best line possible, and it's actually going to be Pinnacle based on this time at minus 148. So with all of that said, stop basing your research on the most surface level of things and start adding a little bit of context to your picks. Start by looking at the starting pitcher and how their teams perform whenever they are on the bump, and then look at the batting profiles, followed up by the weather data, the ballpark factors, and then how the market is reacting to this particular play. Those are the 5 checks that you can use when trying to profit on this first 5 totals market. And if you want to start using this strategy today, go ahead and check the description below and you can get started with a 7-day free trial on Outlier. If you also found that this video was helpful, go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell because I am going to be dropping these tutorials every single week. Anyways, best of luck betting out there, and I will see you in the next one.